Hello friends, this is Deepak and with me is Snehal. Snehal is an estate planning attorney and he'll be joining us at the Wealth Summit 2023. Now, if you have not registered for the Wealth Summit, very simple, just go to sanjeevcpa.com and register for the summit. It's a full day event and we have a lot of speakers just like Snehal out there giving you a lot of information. But today I want to talk to Snehal a little bit about as to what is he planning to cover. And one of the topics that comes to my mind all the time is what happens to all our estate in the United States if we move back to India still, or maybe not even permanently. Maybe we go there for a few years and then we come back. I mean, oftentimes I meet with families who wants to take their kids for education and then come back. Some people always say, look, I'm only going to be here for 5 years, 10 years, then I'm going to go back. They might never go back, but at least that's what they have in mind. So all those people were thinking about either going to India or they have already moved to India. How does the estate planning kind of works out in that scenario?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, Deepak. As we all know, estate planning, it's a lot more than just planning after your death, right? It's also planning during your lifetime to make sure that your life goes seamlessly on. Now, just to refresh our memory, generally, what is estate planning, right? Very basically, or as a basic concept, think of it as three verticals, right? Your first vertical is about distributing all your wealth after your death to your beneficiaries, and the idea is you want to distribute that wealth without it getting stuck in the court process.
Yeah, somebody taking a little chunk out of it, right?
Exactly. So it goes to the court, then obviously there's going to be a lot of downside to it. It doesn't matter whether that goes in a court in India or in the US, right? Second idea is to make sure that your children, especially if they are minor children, under 18 years of age, they don't end up in foster care. Foster care is like a government institution which takes over the child if something happens to the parents, right? And that's the harsh reality in the US. And then the third thing is obviously ensuring that if you are incapacitated, which means you are medically unfit, you can't make your decisions because of some mental incapacity or a health condition, then there are some other people who can make your decisions, can access your records, do things for you that otherwise you are able to do. And unfortunately, a lot of people don't realize that it's not like in India. In India, your family and relatives for sure, but many times your friends and neighbors can make our decisions, access our information without legal authorization. Now, how does all this tie up if you are in the US and relocating back to India, or even the other way around? And now think of all these three verticals and let's try and parse it out how this is going to play out. Let's say you acquired all your wealth in the US, right? I mean, you're working in the US, unfortunately, for whatever reason, you lost your job, or otherwise you have immigration issues, or generally as a matter of your own personal or business decision, you decide to relocate to India. Now, remember, you may move to India, but your assets are US assets. Okay, so it doesn't matter, they will be governed under US law, right? So what that means, should something happen to you, which means if you pass away, those assets distribution will be controlled by US law. So if you have a trust here, they will not end up in court, which means they will not end up in probate. Even if you are an Indian citizen, right? Doesn't matter whether you are US citizen or Indian citizen, nexus of assets is always where you acquired them, generally. Now let's take the second vertical for instance, like if your children, they are minor children. Now let's break that down further. Let's add one more wrinkle is, let's say the child is an Indian citizen or a child is a US citizen. Now if that child is, let's say, an Indian citizen and that child moves out of the US, doesn't matter whether they go to Canada or some other country or go back to India if that's their home country, right? Obviously the US jurisdiction will end the minute that child physically is outside of the US boundary. So you don't really have to worry about guardianship in that case. But if the same child is a US born, and this is a common element where the parents may have relocated here, but the child was born here, and the child is a citizen of the United States, even if that child is living in India, yes, certainly the child may not end up in foster care because it's not like the Indian government or police will take over the child. But remember that child will need coverage from a US perspective. Why? Let's say they have to get visas, passports, right? Any school forms, any other information. They are US citizens. So they definitely will need somebody like a guardian who has the legal authorization to sign those documents for them. Now, take the example of the third vertical. If you're medically unfit, how does that impact you? Now, if you're physically in India, the medical side of the authorization will be irrelevant, because as we all know that in India you don't need those authorizations, because pretty much the whole village can make decisions for you, right? Medical decisions. But if you have assets in the US, any financial records in the US, and remember, financial is not only about assets, it's also about any records, say IRS filings, any scholarship forms, any 401k IRA dealings, any bank accounts, etc. All those will require a US legal authorization. So remember, it doesn't matter whether you move back to India or you stay within the US. What you have to decide is whether that particular situation is governed under US law. Will that continue to apply regardless of where you are geographically located at a given point in time? So definitely a lot of nitty-gritties in this. Some of it we'll try and cover during the Well Summit. Of course, you can always contact otherwise also outside of the Well Summit, but that's generally one very good question you asked about. And a lot of people, especially earlier in the year, lost their jobs, got laid off, or didn't unfortunately get into an immediate renewal of the H1B or another employer who was willing to sponsor. And we did get a lot of those queries, and we still continue to see that kind of a movement happening.
So guys, Snehal going to be at the Well Summit whole day long. So I know we only have few minutes today to make this video, but he will be there. He has dedicated the entire day for us. What that means for you guys is you're welcome to walk up to him, ask your questions. Normally you come into Snehal's office, he charges pretty big, heavy fees, although he's a good friend, but he's a lawyer after all. He got to pay for his bills. But that day, he's there to answer your questions. How valuable that is, right? You come there, his staff going to be there, he will be there. And even though the Well Summit is going on, there are other presentations going on, but he's there whole day long. You can go sit with him, ask your questions. He can guide you how you can manage your estate, what should you do. And, honestly speaking, there are so many flavors of estate planning, and every now and then when I talk to Snehal, he kind of mesmerized me with all the new information. And you wouldn't know about that until you ask questions. So I encourage you guys to please reach out to his office, come to the Well Summit, talk to his staff, and ask your questions. How is this? I'm sure you have some way of tackling these issues. There's something you're doing even today, which we typically call a default path. And default path is not often the right path. It's often a wrong path. And you need to know that, right? You need to know where that path will lead you. Where would you end up? How much would that cost? How can it hurt you? What are the alternatives? How can you easily fix that problem? Estate planning for the most part, is just planning. You sit down, you think about it, you put it down on paper, and you execute. Really, that's it. So all it takes is some time. So please do come to the Well Summit and talk to Snehal about your estate planning needs. If you have any questions, leave it in the video. I'll pass it on to Snehal, and his office will get back to you and answer any questions you might have. Thank you so much, and I look forward to seeing you at the Well Summit. Thank you so much, Snehal, for your time this morning.
Thank you, Deepak, and looking forward to meeting all of you at the Well Summit.